topic number 5 is going to be about isosceles triangles. So we've already talked about isosceles triangles in our class, but now we're just going to expand on that more. So let's recall, right? An isosceles triangles have at least 2 congruent sides, and we talked about last class how that meant that they also had 2 congruent angles, okay? We have a lot more vocab that we can talk about with isosceles triangles. So given what the 2 congruent sides are, those are going to start to be called our legs, okay? So take a minute and pause the video if you want to copy down what is written here, but I am going to go through it. So I know that the legs, whenever you have congruent sides there, those immediately are the legs of your isosceles triangle, okay? That third side that doesn't have a tick mark, that third side is going to be your base, okay? Then when we talk about our angles, we have 2 different types of angles as well. We have the vertex angle. The vertex angle is always going to connect the 2 legs, okay? So that where the 2 legs are connecting, that's your vertex angle. And then our base angles, notice those are lying on the base, and we're actually going to know that those are congruent. Remember, 2 congruent sides, 2 congruent angles. A helpful trick that I like to remember is like the legs, when I put tick marks on that, they're pointing to the base angles. So I know which angles are congruent, okay? So let's try to apply that to this problem, and let's identify the parts of an isosceles triangle ABC. So my first task is to list the legs of an isosceles triangle, and I know that the legs are my congruent sides, right? Well, looking over in this picture, I have a tick mark here and a tick mark here. These are the legs of my isosceles triangle. So my legs are AB and BC. Those are the legs. The base, part 2, says what is the base of the isosceles triangle? Well, the base is the third side that doesn't have the tick mark. So the base here is going to be AC. What is the vertex angle? The vertex angle is going to connect the 2 legs. So here's leg number 1, here's leg number 2. That means that angle B, where those 2 connected, that's my vertex angle. And then my other 2 angles, or the ones that are exactly across from the legs and lie on the base, right? Those are my base angles of the isosceles triangle. So angle A and angle C, those are the base angles. So the reason why this vocab is important is because when I give you a problem, you want to be able to identify which is the legs, or what are the legs and what are the base angles, so you know which sides and which angles are congruent, okay? So before we get to those type of problems, though, let's look at some angle puzzle type of problems, okay? So like I've just said a couple of times, this is called the isosceles triangle theorem, right? A theorem is something that's been proven, so we know this to be true. So the base angles of an isosceles triangle, it's very important, it's only an isosceles, they're going to be congruent, okay? This other bullet you can cross out. We do not need that. That was from a previous, it's a typo. It's stuck in there. So all I need to know is that the base angles are congruent. So in all of these examples in 1 and 2, the directions say to solve for x and y in the triangles, all right? I'm looking at this triangle. I immediately know this is isosceles. The 2 tick marks here mean that those are my legs. And then I immediately know that this angle 26 and this angle are going to be congruent because those would be my base angles. Those lie on the base, the other side. Okay? That already helps me solve for x. I then know that x is also going to be 26 degrees. Okay? So that's how I'm using the isosceles triangle theorem with the base angles being congruent. Okay? Now, though, I have to solve for y. I have to solve for my vertex angle. I don't know that that's congruent. However, we have done a lot of times in this class, we have talked about what does this angle plus this angle plus this angle equal, and that is 180 degrees. So I can add 26 and 26. That's going to get me 52. And I can take that sum away from 180, and I believe that gets me 128. And that means I know that this angle here is 128. Now, be very careful. That's obtuse, right? It does not look obtuse. In this class, we do not assume. Okay? Assuming is bad. You guys know if you're one of my students, you know what I tell you about assuming, and we won't put that here in the video, but you know. Okay? Let's look at example 2. All right? Example 2, now the angle 26 that I gave you is the vertex angle. In the previous example, I had given it to you as one of the base angles, but we don't know that, okay? Now when 26 is the vertex angle, I still have my congruent legs. Those are pointing to my congruent base angles, right? Remember those two angles that are congruent, they lie on the base. I'm kind of stuck here, right? Normally I would say, okay, if these two have to be the same, I would be able to put a measure for both of them, okay? And this process is a little bit different. I know that at least one angle is 26, and I know that all three angles have to add to 180. So I'm going to take 180, and let's subtract out the 26, right, that I've already used. So 180 minus 26, I think that's 154. What that means is I have 154 degrees left to split up between these two angles here, x and y. Now, what do we know about x and y? We know those two angles are congruent, so I can take that 154 and divide that angle by 2. And I think when I do that, I'm going to get 77. And that means that each of these angles is 77 degrees, and both of those are going to be congruent, okay? So now when you have an isosceles triangle, you can use the base angles being congruent to help you find all of the missing angles, as well as the fact that all three angles have to add to 180. All right, let's look at the last example. The last example, they didn't give me anything. They didn't like have some sentence up here that they told me, right? But they did give me a lot of information in the picture. In the picture, they gave me two expressions that represented angles, and they gave me tick marks. Well, this is a triangle with two sides being equal. We know this triangle is isosceles. Okay? The picture tells me that. We also know that the two tick marks, that those are the legs, and that means that this third side here is the base. Now, in all of the previous examples, the base has always been the bottom side here. That does not need to be the case, okay? The base is just the third side that isn't congruent to another side there, all right? So let's look at letter A. Letter A says, set up an equation and solve for x. If I had expressions for the legs here, I probably would have set those equal, but I don't. My expression are on these two angles at the bottom here. Now those angles lie on the base, and what do we know about those angles on the base? Those angles, the base angles, are congruent. So I know that 2x plus 8 is going to have to equal 3x plus 1. And I can now solve for x. I can subtract the 2x. I'm going to bring the bigger side to the smaller side and get 8 equals x plus 1. Subtract over the 1 and get that x equals 7. So I set up an equation and I solved for x. Now it says find the measure of all missing angles. Whenever I have to find the measure of something, I always want to take the x value that I found and plug in, okay? So let's plug into one of the expressions over here. 3 times x plus 1. Well, x was 7. 3 times 7 is 21. 21 plus 1 is 22. Now, these angles are congruent, so we should get 22 for the other angle also, but let's check. 2 times x plus 8. Let's plug in 7. 14 plus 8. 14 plus 8, I think that's 22, and that's good. It's a good sign. Now, be very careful. A lot of you are going to make this mistake. You're going to think you are done, but I said all of the missing angles. You still need to find this vertex angle here. Well, if my two base angles are 22 and 22, we just did examples like this in the top. How can we find the last angle? I can add 22 plus 22 and get 44. All three angles have to add to 180, so 180 minus 44 is 136. And this angle here is 136 degrees. And now I am done. Okay? So what I would do every time you see that a triangle is isosceles, I would immediately mark your legs. If you want to even label the base, that would be helpful too. And then mark your base angles congruent. Every single time. Okay? Good luck on practice and good luck on your homework, and I will see you in class.